Okay, so good morning, everybody. Before starting with my presentation, I would like to express my gratitude to Michela Gaudiello and Agnieszka Zimczak for inviting me in taking part into this seminar and into opening this seminar series, actually. Today, I'm going to tell you about the 10 years of field research in the area of Seglamen, which, as Michela already said, were first directed by the late Rodolfo Fattovic and are now co-directed by Andrea Manzo and myself. Don't know why. Okay. Can you see the second slide just to make sure that?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so as you can see from the map on your left hand, the site of Seglamen is located about 12 kilometers to the southwest of Aksum, along a river valley, the Mai Negus Haselo River Valley, which drains directly into the Tekeze, and from the Tekeze drains directly into the Atbara. So it is somehow, the area of Seglamen, it is somehow closely related with the western Ethiopian and Eritrean plateau and the eastern Sudanese regions. This area has been selected as our area of investigation because this river valley, the Mai Negus Haselo River Valley, represented historically an important exchange route linking Aksum and the general Tigrayan highland with the internal regions of the Horn of Africa. Excavations and archaeological investigations at Seglamen are part of a broader project which focuses in a 100 square kilometer study area. You can see it in the map on your left hand, out with the outline with the red rectangular outline. This is our study area. And the main goal of the project is to provide a reconstruction of the population history and ancient human environmental dynamics in the region to the southwest of Aksum, to provide a reconstruction of long-distance cultural and economic interactions in this area, and to provide, for the benefit of and the protection of the archaeological heritage of the area, a detailed archaeological map of the study area. Moreover, a side goal of the project is to provide a practical training in archaeological field procedures to undergraduate and MA students of Aksum University and Addis Ababa University, as well as students from University of Naples Orientale. So our expedition at Seglamen is also a field school for undergraduate and MA students. Now, today I'm going to focus specifically on the excavations and investigations at site SG1 at Seglamen, and I will tell you about the results of our researches. When did the existence of a relevant archaeological site in this area came to the light? Well, everything started in the 60s of last century, when a South Arabian inscription that you can see up here, upright, was brought to the light by a local farmer while he was plowing his land. And the red arrow shows you exactly where the inscription was found. Now, the inscription commemorates the erection or restoration, the translation is not yet clear, of a temple dedicated to a South Arabian deity, Haubas, in this area. And it is a typical monumental South Arabian inscription. but with the kind of with the typical entronization formula, commemorating also the came to power of King Waran Haywood. But it also has elements that are not clearly related to the typical, the pure South Arabic or Sabian cultural tradition. For instance, the mentioning in the inscription of the mother of the king, so this stress on the female matrilinear, let's say like this, tradition, which is not found in South Arabic inscriptions, and also some linguistic elements that remind to local languages rather than pure Sabian script. Anyhow, the inscription that has been found at this site, at the site of Seglamen, has been classified among the oldest South Arabian inscriptions found or attested on the Tigrayan plateau, dating back to the 8th century BC. In search of the possible temple and let's say early first millennium BC or Sabian site related to the inscription, an expedition of University of Rome La Sapienza, directed by Lanfranco Ricci and with the collaboration of then young archaeologist Rodolfo Fatovic, started investigations in the area of Seglamen, right in the area where the inscription was brought to the light in 1973, 1974. And but the excavations conducted at that time brought to the light the remains of post-Aksumite structure, so that can be dated around the 10th, 11th century CE or AD, that were directly erected on more ancient walls. Then, as you might know, in 1973-74, the Derg regime came to power in Ethiopia, and all the foreign expeditions, archaeological expeditions, were abruptly interrupted. So no more excavations at Seglamen no more investigations at Seglamen until 2016, when, in the framework of the World Bank Ethiopian Cultural Heritage Project, we conducted the systematic survey of the whole area of Aksum that Michela was mentioning at the beginning of this of the lecture, and we decided to extend our survey also to the neighboring areas of Aksum. So we revisited the site of Seglamen in search of surface evidence of more ancient, possibly, let's say, pre-Aksumite materials. And we were lucky because at the time we were able to identify the really ancient sites on the basis of surface ceramics and other materials. And in 2020 we started the proper project. So the first thing we did at Seglamen before starting with any archaeological excavation was an intra-site surface survey, during which we were able to define the general extension of the ancient site, which is approximately of about 7 hectares. And we were also able to identify different functional areas within the site. So to the easternmost sector of the site, exactly on the terrace overlooking the conjunction, we can say, of the Mainegussa Selo with the small tributary, we identified the remains of the settlement area. And about 50 meters to the northwest of the settlement, in the area which is called traditionally Mogareb, we identified the remains of the possible ancient cemetery that was associated with the settlement. And in the westernmost sector of the site, we found evidence of what we can define as specialized activity areas. That means areas with a temporary occupation or not an intensive occupation, probably lithic workshops and other, let's say, temporary occupied areas. We combined archaeological survey with geophysical survey, and we applied magnetic and electrical resistivity tomography to confirm the presence of varied structure and varied tombs, and to have again a general idea of the broader extension of the structures. And of course, already in 2020, we started with our intensive and extensive excavations. So now I'm going to tell you about the results of the excavations in the settlement and in the cemetery. And I'm going to start with the settlement area. So as you can see here in the map to your left hand, you see some of the excavation units that we established in the settlement, which are those located in the easternmost sector of the map. And we conducted excavations in different areas, but the deepest and the thickest archaeological deposit is the one in the center, where you can see, in this case, 6 adjacent excavation units opened or plotted on the map. In that area, we have the evidence of 3 occupational phases characterized by different types of domestic structures. So I'm going to start from phase 1, which is at the bottom of the sequence, which means the most ancient occupation phase attested in that area of the settlement. Excavations brought to light for this phase the remains of a rough rectangular house with possibly a thin wall delimiting a backyard. The house was characterized by 4 rooms outlined in a L shape. You can see from the numbers: room 1, room 2, room 3, and room 4, all of them facing a kind of front courtyard, which was accessed by a stepped by a few steps. Room 1 is the central room, and you can see also, I'm going to tell you about what we found in room 1 in the coming minutes. But now I want to focus on room 3, where you can see we found the remains of a rough circular stone slab in the center of the room, directly above the living floor, and this was possibly the stone where a kind of wooden pole was placed in order to support the roof, like we have, or we can observe still now in traditional Tigrayan houses, rural houses in this area. But the intriguing element that we found in room 1 is the traces of a foundation deposit that we found within the stone platform, the foundation platform of the house. So immediately below the living floor, while removing the stone-made foundation platform, we found the remain of this foundation deposit, which is characterized by an open kind of brown, black-topped brown bowl, which contained a smaller jar and a bronze spatula and some animal bones, burned animal bones. And this finding is quite unusual and quite intriguing because the materials that we found associated with this house point to a domestic house, kind of rural house. And it's uncommon, and it is never attested in any other Tigrayan site, the presence of foundation deposits in domestic areas, And even more, it is not attested even in any of the domestic context of the Nile Valley, neither in context of in South Arabian context. In the Nile Valley in particular, we have foundation deposits in ritual or let's say sacral structures, but foundation deposits in domestic sites are so far not attested. Anyhow, we are looking for additional examples in order to try to understand much better the culture that is behind this habit of placing foundation deposit within, we can say, secular houses. And even more intriguing, below the leading floor of the front courtyard, we also found what remains of a female figurines representing a lady holding her breast with one arm. Unfortunately, the other part is missing. But again, this is not a traditional way of representation of female figurines in this area. But I'm going back on this point, on this topic later on. Immediately above the ruins of the house of phase 2, we recorded the remains of a second occupation phase, which is very badly represented and very poorly preserved because it was disturbed later on by the third occupation phase. Anyhow, what is intriguing of this phase is the evidence of a circular wall that you can see in a photo on the upper right of the slide, which is clearly what remains of a circular house. And this is intriguing because this is the first real evidence of the tradition of building circular houses, and not only quadrangular or rectangular houses in this region, going back to the first half of the first millennium BC. So far, we only had evidence of this tradition in the clay model of houses that were found at the site of Ahulti in a votive deposit dating to the mid, I can say mid first millennium BC. So in this case, even if poorly represented, this occupation phase 2 provided evidence of a really important cultural trait of the people living in this area at that time. And then on top of the archaeological sequence, we have the building of phase 3, which is quite a large building, measuring 70.40 by almost 13 meters. And it is characterized by 10 rooms. Unfortunately, the preservation of this building is very poor, and we only have the foundation levels, but in room 1, we were able to identify what remains of a structure that might have supported an upper floor. So again, we can date to the first half of the first millennium BC the habit, the ability of building quite monumental structures with more than one story. With the technique, with an architectural technique and architectural solution that is typical, that we will find also in the most impressive royal palaces of the Aksumite period in the area of Aksum. So this is one important element that we have to keep in mind. And also the width, the thickness of the walls, of the main walls, corroborates this idea of the possible existence of an upper, or of at least an additional floor, because the walls were wide between 1 meter point 10 and 1 meter point 20 centimeters, so quite large enough to support an additional floor. And in the easternmost sector of the settlement, in 2014, we opened up a new excavation trench, a new excavation unit, right to the north of the excavation unit that were opened by Fatovic and Ricci in 1973. And we were able in this area to identify the remains of quite a massive and huge building, even larger than the building of phase 3 that I just showed you, almost double in size. And in the coming, so this happened in 2014, and on that occasion we were able to bring to the light 5 rooms and to excavate entirely one room, the southernmost room. But in the subsequent field season, we were able to open up to excavate the other rooms and to outline the general extension and layout of the building. And yeah, dealing with the chronology, why I am stressing the point that all these occupation phases go back to the first half of the first millennium BC. First of all, because of the ceramics associated to the archaeological context. Michela Gaudiello knows very well these ceramics, because the ceramics of this settlement was the main goal of the analysis of the ceramics of this of the settlement was the main goal of her PhD dissertation. So she can confirm that the ceramics associated to the 3 occupation phases and to all the buildings found in the settlement area, or exposed in the settlement area, belongs to, we can say, the typical first half of the first millennium BC ceramic tradition in central Tigray. Why I am using this very long definition? Because I really don't like to use the term pre-Aksumite, and when I tend to use it, I use it only in a chronological perspective, but not in a cultural perspective. So I usually tend to prefer to use first half of the first millennium BC ceramic tradition, as already suggested by Fatovic. And again, the ceramics from this site fits perfectly in what is the first half of the first millennium BC ceramic tradition of central Tigray, with also evidence of imported elements from eastern Tigray. Of course, there are some changes in the typology of the ceramics from among the 3 occupation phases. But I'm not going to enter into this specific ceramic typology discourse. What I want to stress is that the shapes are generally very simple. Typically, we have jars, bowls, pots, cups, and flasks with incised or molded or combed incised and impressed and molded decoration. And also decoration patterns are quite simple: horizontal lines, wavy lines, and zigzag lines. And the fabrics are, well, the common fabrics of, let's say, the pre-Aksumite ceramics in central Tigray. So we have evidence of red polished fine ware, orange fine, medium, and coarse ware, black polished fine ware, but typical of this period are also the so-called black topped ware, which have the outside parts of the pot, orange, red, or brown, and the inside, the internal part, and the externally black. So that's why we call them black topped ware. Now, dealing with absolute chronology, we have radiocarbon datings from several of the contexts that we brought to the light in the settlement, and radiocarbon dating from the living floor of the domestic house of phase 1, point to and yearly 900 BC dating of that context, and datings from context from living floor and collapse of the big building, the one that I just showed you at Seglamen 15 and adjacent trenches, point to a use of the structure between 940 BC and up to 700 BC. Later on, as we can see from the ceramics and the absolute datings, the radiocarbon datings, we have a post-Aksumite disturbance of the building, of the easternmost building, of the large building, of the largest building of our, so far found in our settlement, in the settlement. And this later occupation is attested by evidence of black coarse ware and brown gray coarse ware, which is typical of the post-Aksumite period, of what we call post-Aksumite period. And radiocarbon datings also confirm this interpretation by pointing to dating between the 10th and 11th century AD or CE. So now let's move about 50 meters to the northwest of the settlement, in the area of Mogareb, where the remains of an ancient cemetery were identified and investigated starting from 2020. Starting from 2010, sorry. So what do we have in the cemetery? So far, we were able to excavate about 35 tombs, and we can classify, or we can group the tombs into 3 main types. So that are represented here in the right hand of the slide. We have rough circular shaft tomb and rectangular shaft tomb, and we also have circular or rectangular tombs associated with stela. And this is again another important element, cultural element, that we are going to stress later on. But intriguingly, we also have evidence, at least in one case, of the presence of cenotaph. Now, what is a cenotaph? The cenotaph is an empty tomb. In our case, we have, at least in one case, an undisturbed tomb, an undisturbed burial, with its full grave good characterized by black-topped ware and incense burners. As you can see, some of them are represented in the photo here in the bottom, but with no evidence of human remains at all. And on the contrary, a stela is buried within the shaft tomb, within the tomb. And this is again intriguing because we have evidence of the habit of using cenotaphs also, and my colleague Andrea Manzo will tell you about this on the coming Wednesday, Also on the hilltop of Beta Georgis, within the Proto-Aksumite cemetery. So within the cemetery that developed at Beta Georgis in the second half of the first millennium BC. So immediately before the emergence of Aksum of the Aksumite culture and of Aksum as a strong and prominent polity. Alongside circular shaft tombs, rectangular shaft tombs, and the tombs associated with stela and cenotaphs, we also have the evidence of votive deposits. Votive deposits appear to be distributed around the clusters of tombs, and sometimes they use natural shallowing or natural depressions in the bedrock of the area, and in this votive deposit we find offerings that were probably brought by the people living in the settlements to commemorate and celebrate their ancestors. And this, the remains of these deposits are mostly characterized by miniatures of beakers and cups, as you can see. So what we call ceramic miniatures, but also miniatures of animal figurines, and sometimes of small little bronze ornament, an earring, a ring, or a small pendant have been found in several of these votive deposits. But the major characteristic, the most represented artifacts are the miniatures of beakers that you can see here in situ while excavating in the upright side of the slide, and also in central photographs in the bottom. Just 1 minute, I can't change the slide. Let's see what happened. Okay. Here we are. So, as I told you, an intriguing element of the cemetery at Seglamen is represented by the occurrence of funerary stela. Why, for me, it is an intriguing element? Because we don't have evidence of stele at any of the other pre-Aksumite cemeteries so far excavated in Tigray. You don't have even the evidence of stele in pre-Aksumite tombs at Yeha. And the stela is one of the typical cultural funerary traits of the subsequent Proto-Aksumite and Aksumite culture that we can observe at Beta Georgis and slowly spreading out parallel to the expansion of the Aksumite culture and of the Aksumite polity. So the difference between the stele that we have at Seglamen and the stele that have been recorded in the Proto-Aksumite and Aksumite cemeteries in the area of Aksum is the major difference is in terms of raw materials. In this case, we have sandstone, red sandstone stela, which is a type of rock which is abundant in the area, while in the area of Aksum, we will have mostly or absolutely completely syenite stele, which syenite is a kind of granite rock, which is again abundant in the area of Aksum. And the other difference is that while in the area of Aksum, the stelae are not associated to a single tomb, but they mark a cluster of tombs. In this case, the stela is, each stela is placed directly in the tomb, tombs without stela are placed around the tomb with the stela. So it seems to be already a kind of marker of clusters, maybe representing clans or families, we don't know, but not yet erected out of the tombs, but still within the tomb. Another important element is the presence of a stone platform. So the tombs were cut in the bedrock, but were covered with a stone platform, which in the case of Seglamen is very badly and poorly preserved, but it is quite well attested. You can see it in the photo to the right of the slide, in the Proto-Aksumite and Aksumite cemetery at Bieta Georgis, where you have this massive stone platform covering the cemetery and expanding parallel to the expansion of the cemetery. So again, another cultural trait linking the people from living at Seglamen in the early first millennium BC to the people that were occupying the hilltop of Bieta Georgis during the Proto-Aksumite time, and that were practically the foundation of the Aksumite culture. An important element that should be stressed related to the presence of stela is that we have the habit of using funerary stela in several sites along the Upper Nile Valley in present Sudan. And you can see it, you can see in the map here the sites where the Sudanese sites, the Nubian sites, where the use of funerary stele is attested. And I would like to point to attract your attention on the site of Kassala, which is along the Marebgash Valley, river valley, nearby the border with the Western Eritrean and Ethiopian plateau. At Kassala, we have evidence of funerary stele starting from the mid-3rd millennium BCE. And already Rodolfo Fatovic suggested the possible connection, cultural connection of the habit of using funerary stele between Kassala, the people living in the Kassala area, and the late Proto-Aksumite and Aksumite tradition. In the case of Seglamen, with the evidence of the stela, we are pulling back the origin or the first evidence of the habit of using funerary stela in this area to the early 1st millennium BC. So now the time span between the Sudanese attested use of funerary stele and the, let's say, Ethiopian Eritrean use is narrowing a bit. So we hope to find more connections between these two regions. Now let me tell you about another type of tomb that emerged in 2016, which is Tomb 31. Tomb 31 is so far the richest tomb that we excavated. It was marked by a sandstone stela, and it is a pit tomb 3 meters deep with a side chamber to the west. And you can see here the sandstone slab that was closing the side chamber, and here the chamber after the removal of the sandstone slab and after the removal of part of the human bones that were found in the chambers. Why this tomb is peculiar? It is peculiar not only because it is really deep, the deepest one and the most articulated one, and because it has it is marked by a stela, but it's also peculiar because it is a collective burial. So within this tomb, in the central pit, at the base of the central pit, and in the side chamber, we found remains of about no less than 10 individuals. And individuals buried in these tombs were of all ages and of well, both female and male. So we tend to think that this was a family tomb, and it was the tomb of a quite an impressive and important family. All the people buried in this tomb were adorned by several bronze ornaments, but also several types of necklaces with made out of several types of beads, and huge funerary, huge grave goods were found associated to these burials, mostly characterized by black-topped ware. And here you can see some of the metal beads or other stone beads and bangles that were found still on the body of the people that were inhumated here, even on the body of the small kids. And some of these ornaments are really interesting because you can find comparisons with ornaments that were used by the Egyptians to represent the people from the Upper Nile Valley, or the so-called Kushite or Nubians. Here you can see for the representation of 4 Kushites in the tomb of Horeme bin Saqqara, and you can clearly see the same types of earrings used to represent the Kushites have been found in one of our in tomb 31 at Seglamen, and also this cornelian. This red jasper pendant, quite elongated pendant that we have found in our tomb, it can be compared with the pendant used to represent again a Kushite in one of the Egyptian temples in Sudan. So this is another element that clearly relates the people that were living, occupying the area of Seglamen in the early 1st millennium BC period with the people that were living in the Upper Nile Valley in the same times, in the same period, and even before. Another peculiar element is found in tomb 1. That Michela, I think, remembers very well, is the first tomb that we excavated in 2010. And we were lucky at that time because we were able to find a undisturbed tomb with all its grave goods still preserved, and the very few remains of the body. Because I have to stress the point that it is very difficult for us to conduct analysis on the bones, on the human bones buried in the tombs, because the soil in this area is very acidic, so the bones are very badly preserved. It is really rare that we can have well-preserved skeletons that allow us to reconstruct, to identify the gender and make also studies on paleopathologies and so on. So in this case, the human bones were very badly preserved, but the tomb was undisturbed, and we were able to find also the ornaments associated with the body and the ceramic assemblage that was put in the tomb. And among these, I want to stress want to point your attention on this bottle. It's what remains of a bottle, or possible. It was possibly a bottle because it is empty, although the base is missing. And this is clearly an anthropomorphic bottle, which represents a female, a lady, a pregnant lady. And interesting are also the punctuations on the breast, because this gives one of the very few examples so far attested in this area of intentional body modification. So this is a line of research that we have to stress, the occurrence of body modifications and the relation also with traditional medicine and ethnomedicine, as we can say. The female figurines are well attested in Tigray, not of this type, not like our figurine, which is a bottle, but we have the same posture, the same type, the same idea already recorded at other pre-Aksumite sites. And you can see from in the center here some female figurines from surface collection at Medietrraneo in Shire, west of Aksum, west of Seglamen, and also female figurines found from illegal. It's very sad to say, but it was illegal actually excavation in the area of Chila, nearby the border with Eritrea to the northwest of Aksum. Anyhow, the figurines from Medietrraneo and from Chila are standalone figurines. In our case, we have what we think remains of a bottle, but you can see the representation is almost the same. In some cases, you also have the presence of an infant. So this lady, which is milking an infant, and but in general, the posture of the arms, the representation also of the ears and the face traits with the holes for the earrings, as well as the very rough representation of the pregnancy are more or less the same, are almost the same. So they go within the same traditional culture that was possibly or most likely related to a worship of fertility. And yeah, I just want to remark that the female, the anthropomorphic bottle, the female bottle is not the only example of female figurines that we have found at Seglamen. You also certainly remind the fragmented figurines that was found in the foundation levels of the courtyard of the domestic house in phase 1, with the arm holding the breast. But we also have other types of figurines, more schematic, that clearly resemble, and these varieties of typologies can find strong comparisons with female figurines found in Egypt, in contextual but coeval, but also earlier sites in Egypt and Sudan. So again, another element linking the people living at Seglamen with the Nile Valley. What else we found in the cemeteries as part of the grave goods? We have metal stamps or seals, and these two in particularly clearly resemble seal stamps typical of South Arabia that have been found at Yeha. We also have evidence of models, clay models of houses. In this case, in the upper case, you see the model of a rural compound. In the lower case, you see the model of a two-story rectangular building, so clearly resembling to the building that we actually excavated in the settlement. And we have also evidence of stone crescents made out of obsidian or chalcedony. The occurrence of crescents in the tombs, in the burials, is another element that links the people here, the funerary tradition attested at Seglamen, with the funerary tradition of the proto-Aksumite and Aksumite culture attested at Bieta-Giorgis, because also in proto-Aksumite and early Aksumite tombs at Bieta-Giorgis, we have the presence of crescents that in some cases were not used. So they were realized just to be put as part of the grave good to accompany the deceased in his or her afterlife. And also the presence of clay models of houses is something that might be that might have continued during the Proto-Aksumite and Aksumite culture at Bieta-Giorgis, because in Proto-Aksumite and Aksumite tombs in the area of Aksum, we have the presence of what we call architectural basin. You can see fragments of two of them in the lower part of the right side, of the left side of the slide. And these architectural basins that actually reproduce the house and the compound can be the continuation of the tradition of placing clay models of houses in tombs that we have at Seglamen. And also the anthropomorphic bottle can find, but this is just speculation now, find a continuation in the typical anthropomorphic bottle that we found in several of the elite tombs during the early and classic Aksumite period. Now, dealing with later burials, I have to stress the point that the dating, absolute dating from tomb 31, which is the very rich tombs with the multiple burials, point to 980, 940 BC. We have 4 datings from the same tomb, directly from the bones, and all of them, they point to the same period. So they converge at the very beginning of the of the first millennium BC, attesting what? Attesting of the occurrence of a social complexity in this area, starting from already the early first millennium BC. And I have to add that other pre-Aksumite sites excavated, for instance, in eastern Tigray, pointed to the emergence of complex society in the Tigrayan plateau already to the late second millennium BC. So between the late second millennium BC and the early first millennium BC, we already have in the Tigrayan plateau communities with the kind of social inequality and economic inequality. But we also have later burials. The burials that you see here, represented in these 2 photos, are burials that have been found, are intrusive burials in the settlement. So within the settlement, the early first millennium BC contexts of the settlement were disturbed in some areas by these intrusive tombs, intrusive burials, and 2 of them have been excavated and radiocarbon dated, and the dates point to the 6th century AD. So we don't have so far evidence of a 6th century AD occupation of the settlement. So the nature or the reason of the presence of these burials in the area of the settlement is still uncertain. What I can say is that both burials that we excavated belong to juvenile, to young people, a young lady and a very young man, and both of them have traces of injuries to the temporal bone. So moreover, they are buried in a contracted position, even if we are already after the adoption and diffusion of Christianity, during which the burial in a supine position developed, and they don't have any trace of funerary goods. Moreover, the young lady, the one that you see in the upper part of the photo, had the two ankles tied together by an iron chain. So were these two people representing marginal segments of the society or slaves? We don't know, because so far we only have these two isolated evidence, and probably part of a third similar body is represented with was recorded in the stratigraphy of during the excavation of in the settlement, but has not been completely exposed, and it is marked with the letter C in the 3D model of the settlement. A and B are respectively the female lady and the boy, the young lady and the young boy. And also evidence of a later burial is attested in the cemetery, in the proper cemetery area. With this body, this is a male, quite tall, buried in a supine position with no traces of grave goods, and radiocarbon datings from this tomb point to a date between the 10th and 11th century AD, so coeval to the post-Aksumite reoccupation of the site. Now, well, just a few words about the economy and social structure of the people that were living at Seglamen. Evidence from our excavation suggests that the community that was living at site SG1 was a quite affluent agropastoral community. We have the abundance of bovids, immediately followed by caprovins, and we have evidence of quite an abundant and a wealthy community and an abundant use of bovids, because we have evidence of butchering also of very young specimens. Not only the very adult bovids were butchered, but also young specimens. Among the agricultural the cultivation, we have evidence of wheat, fingermillet, barley, but also evidence of the use of wild plants and wild botanical species. And interesting is the presence in the domestic context of elements of evidence of Ziziphus spinacristi, which is a kind of raw of wild fruit that still the kids in northern Ethiopia used to eat as a snack, and that was also and is still also used in traditional medicine. So the paleobotanical evidence can also open up a line of research on the reconstruction of possible ancient medical practices. And intriguingly, we also have the evidence of Eragrostis species. Now, we are not 100% sure if we have already evidence of domesticated teff, but the species is the same, and cautious and wait for further analysis. But the use of teff can also be suggested by the isotopic analysis, by the results of isotopic analysis that have been conducted on human bones that point to the predominancy of C4 type of cereals on C3 types of cereals, and C4 types are mostly cereals that belong to the Eragrostis species like teff and fingermillet. Alongside agriculture and herding, also other types of artifacts have been attested at Seglamen. We have evidence, and Michela can confirm you, evidence of pottery making, but we also have evidence of possibly glass production. But so far we only have an isolated evidence, so we remain again cautious. And as I told you, we have evidence of social complexity and economic inequality already attested in the early first millennium BC, and it's represented by a variety of elements like the quantity of grave goods in certain tombs, like the different types of houses and domestic houses and versus monumental palaces, and the presence of course, administrative devices like metal stamps and clay stamps. And the metal stamps, as I told you, are more similar to South Arabic seals. The clay ones are more similar to seals that are attested in the Nile Valley and in the Nubian context. And the area, we can say, that was included in a long distance exchange network, because we have evidence of imported materials. We have mother of pearl from the Red Sea area. We have evidence of faience beads from the Nile Valley. And we have evidence of torpedo-shaped jars from typical of the South Arabian present Yemen cultures at the time. But at the end, and to conclude, who were the people that were living in this area? So far, we don't know, or I mean, we will never be able to know how they called themselves. Probably we'll never be able to know what language they were speaking. But what we know is that they had strong cultural affinities with the people occupying the Nile Valley, as I tried to stress during my presentation. They were, of course, included in a long distance exchange network also with the other side of the Red Sea and with the Arabic Peninsula, and mostly with the South Arabic Peninsula. And this network was already established in the 3rd millennium BC with the exchange of obsidian. This is the evidence. And then later on, these South Arabian elements became more widespread on the Tigrayan plateau, especially at the site of Ya, but also marginally, very marginally at Seglamen, when groups of South Arabian merchants intensified their exchange with the African coast of the Red Sea. What I can say is that we have at Seglamen, and this I'm almost 100%, never say never, but 100% sure that the people that were living at Seglamen were the direct ancestors of the people that occupied Aksum and gave rise to the so-called proto-Aksumite culture, or some elements of the proto-Aksumite culture on the hilltop of Dieta Georgis, because they have exactly the same funerary tradition. And funerary tradition is a kind of very strong cultural and identity mark, especially in local, in traditional communities. Michela, do I have, no, I think it's time for me to stop, or I have just a couple of minutes.
If you want, I mean, you can still have.
I will yes. Just 2 minutes, just to say, what about the temple? Everything started at Seglamen in search of this temple dedicated to the deity Haubas. we were, because of the inscription, but we didn't, I have to tell you, we didn't find the temple yet. But during the last couple of days, during our 2019, which was the last field season that we had at Seglamen, a local farmer brought to us a collection, his private collection of ceramic miniatures that you see here in these 4 photos on the left side of the slide. And as you can see, these miniatures are quite different. I don't know if you can notice it from the typical miniatures that we have in our cemetery at Seglamen. They are made out of different type of ceramic, a little bit finer than the one we found in the cemetery, and we have different shapes. We have pot stands, we have miniatures of incense burners, we have small bowls, small cups, and small kind of fornello, Michela, of strainer vessel. Let's say like this, strainer vessels, which are different from the types that we found in the cemetery, but are more similar to the assemblage of miniatures that have been found at other pre-Aksumite South Arabian style temples on the Tigrayan plateau. If you compare our collection with these 3 photos that we have here at the bottom of miniatures that have been found at the temple of Mekabergaewa in nearby Vukro in eastern Tigray. So probably this assemblage of small ceramic miniatures confirms us that the temple was really erected at Seglamen, and also the location on a prominent position along facing a river valley can suggest this, because other pre-Aksumite temples that we have at Mekabergaewa, but also Aulti Melazo, have the same strategical geographic location. Where have these miniatures been found by the farmer that owns this private collection? These have been found here, where you see the green arrow in the map. So at the base of the cultivated terrace, not in a prominent position, and have been found within this, what remains of this wall that delimits a kind of natural and perennial water offspring that you see in the photo on the bottom. So what I think is that probably, but we have to investigate more, because the wall continues and goes directly beneath the bush, and we will have to clean in the future. But the bolts, the materials are, to me, they are in situ, because they are almost complete. They are not broken, so they didn't fall from above the terrace down, and they were intentionally placed between the walls, between the stones of this wall. Now, also at other pre-Aksumite sites like Aulti, the temples of Aulti, the temple of Mekabergaewa, these miniature ceramics were not inside the temple, the proper temple, the actual temple, but in the in rooms or along the precinct of the temple. So because there is the area where most of the attendants were allowed to enter. Not everybody was entering in the actual temple. And so probably we have here the same condition. This wall probably is what remains of something that was marking the beginning of the sacred place, and probably the temple was located above on the upper terrace, and the people were simply leaving their votive objects in the external wall, along the external wall, like they still, in a tradition that is still kept, still continues today, where you have people that sometimes, as you can see in the photo to the right, they don't even enter in a church, but they simply stop at the main gate or in the wall surrounding, delimiting the beginning of the sacred space to leave their offerings or to leave their prayers. And with this, I really thank you for your attention.